Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Sandeep Pednikar, and you're watching One Universe, the show that fosters positivity through the promotion of love, peace, and harmony. And every time we have a wonderful guest who has done something good for the community. And today we have none other than Dr. David Allen. Hello, and
Hi,
welcome to the show.
thanks for inviting me.
You are very, very welcome. And for the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
All right, my name's David Allen. I'm retired now, but I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, where I had been a residency director for 16 years. Uh, I'm originally from Southern California, from the San Fernando Valley,
Okay.
North Hollywood, basically. Intact family with one older sister. My father worked was a manager at a drugstore chain. So, we weren't super rich or anything, but we certainly weren't missing anything. Family got along fairly well for family. There was no major issues involved. I went to school, grammar school and junior high and high school. Not far from where I lived. North Hollywood High School is the name of the school that I went to.
Okay.
And I got interested in science at a very young age. I was like every other little kid. I got interested in dinosaurs first, but
Okay.
that kind of
Nice. Okay.
wore out after a little while. And then I thought I'd be maybe a chemist or a physicist. So my goal was to get into Caltech, which is the major university for math and sciences in the West. MIT would have been a little bit too far away and maybe too expensive. So I studied. I got very, very good grades.
Nice.
But then and I didn't get in. My grades were very good, but my SAT scores were just a little bit too low. And looking back on it now, I think that was a great thing that happened to me, because I would not have been happy being a chemist. When I'm in a lab nowadays, I feel like isolated from the universe.
Right.
But so I went to this poor science school called University of California at Berkeley, which actually has very good science.
Oh yeah,
science department.
It is. Yeah.
And I was only there for a year. It was a very unusual time, let's put it that way, from 1966 to 1967.
Okay.
I discovered the Haight-Ashbury before the media did. We hitchhiked into San Francisco because I didn't have a car, and saw the Grateful Dead playing before anybody had ever heard of them. And there were hippies and there were politicos, and they didn't apparently talk to each other. I kind of thought they were all two sides of the same coin, but they weren't at all. But there weren't hippies anywhere else. In fact, after the media did discover it, a bunch of people came from all over the country. Drugs were brought in more heavily because they were into psychedelics mostly back then. And all the real hippies kind of moved out to Marin County and other places. So I had a girlfriend in high school, but at Berkeley, it was like 2-to-1 guys. I didn't have a car. Finally met somebody, but I finally decided I wanted to go back to UCLA. It was just too strange, but I'm really glad that I went there, because I would have missed all those incredible. I mean, going to these ballrooms, the Fillmore and the Avalon, and seeing these light shows and everything. That's absolutely incredible. So my mom was always pushing me to be a doctor. I think maybe she kind of really wished she could have been a doctor. But her parents didn't even think she should have finished high school. The gender issues, I think, were fairly significant
at that time
in my family. So I finally decided, well, sure, I'll go to medical school. And I wanted to stay at UCLA, where I transferred to for 3 years and graduated. The bacteriology major. Again, that was more so. The zoology majors was where most of the pre-meds were, so there was a little bit less competition. But I did okay, and I did okay on the MCATs. And I applied for medical school, and I got into 2 out of the 6 I applied to.
Very nice.
And I didn't get into UCLA. I was put on the waiting list. But I got into UC San Francisco, which actually is a higher rated school than UCLA Medical School, at least back then it was. So getting tired of waiting for UCLA and not wanting to take a chance, I decided, okay, I'll go back to San Francisco. And that's where I went to medical school. And I don't know if I was really that interested in medicine. I mean, I don't think I would have had the temperament for a surgeon, but that was sort of more interesting than some of the other things. But I started to get interested in psychiatry. My mom wasn't happy about that, but too bad. I found it absolutely fascinating. I did my first psych rotation at a military hospital, Letterman Hospital in San Francisco,
Very nice.
and it was just the most amazing thing. And back then, most psychiatrists were still doing psychotherapy. In fact, most of them were psychoanalysts. Psychoanalytic institutes wouldn't even let in psychologists or other kinds of therapists. You had to be an MD. So I still wanted to go back to Southern California. So when it was time to apply for residency, I ended up going down to USC. So I've been kind of associated with 3 out of the 4 major schools.
Very nice.
California
Very nice.
had nothing to do with Stanford. And that was a really interesting situation. And the second year was devoted to sort of learning psychodynamic therapy, which is a version of psychoanalysis. It's just one school now. In psychotherapy, it's a little different than most vocations because there's something like a couple hundred different schools and probably many more sub-schools. And people argue about this stuff all the time. It's very hard to do empirical studies on psychology because we can't read minds and people aren't truthful. They don't know, especially when it comes to talking about their families. They'll give you the sanitized version at first, and you have to know how to get past that. But psychoanalysts weren't really worried about family too much. They were more concerned about the transference, which is you acting around the therapist like you would act with other people so they can understand where you're coming from and then interpret where that may have come from. So most of my training, but luckily I had one good supervisor because the first patient I had a disorder which wasn't even in the diagnostic manual at that time, called borderline personality disorder. Psychoanalysts were talking about it, but they said it was very uncommon. Now it's like 2% of the population, so there hasn't been any selective breeding program for it as far as I know. So I kind of got the idea it was more of a cultural thing, but I didn't know. In fact, I didn't know what it was. In fact, I didn't even know what it's like to be a therapist. So this first patient I had, though, had the disorder, looking back and applying the criteria. And she acted like this class of people does with therapists at first. A lot of them, not all of them, but they have a very bad reputation among therapists. Most people don't want to work with them. And I found out why. And I was wondering why I even wanted to be a therapist. She started insulting me from the minute we
Oh, really?
started.
Oh, wow.
For about 2 or 3 hours. There was nothing I could do right. She compared me to the therapist that had been in the class before me. She was a female. She was a goddess, although she really wasn't because she dumped her on me, and I was a pile of crap. And she insulted everything she could think of. She went to my supervisor, claimed that I was ruining her.
Huh.
So you can imagine how intimidating. And I go, what did I say? Somehow I didn't totally freak out. And the one really great psychoanalytic supervisor, I happen to be my main supervisor, a fellow by the name of Rodney Burgoyne, told me about how you validate these people. You just find something that you can agree with and just ignore all the negativity. And
so one of the characteristics of borderline personality disorders is that when they might be good with everybody, but from their perspective, if one particular person is an enemy, then that person, he might not be, or she might not be, but from their perspective, they have made up their mind that this person is against me, and they will do everything in their power to do any harm to that person. Is that?
Well, that's what a lot of people would have thought, but let me sort of finish the story and why I kind of got another track. Later on, I found out that these people acted this way with certain people. They acted that way with their families, with spouses and lovers, and with therapists, but not necessarily with anybody else. You could see them, at a
being nice to everybody. Yeah,
everybody was really
enjoying life.
You never knew they had any psychological problems at all.
Exactly.
So the one that was insulting me finally did kind of calm down, and we actually spent the whole year together, and we actually got somewhere. But at the end of this year, she started talking to me about what she had been thinking at the time that she had been insulting me. Not in retrospect,
okay,
but what she actually was thinking then.
Okay.
Which was, this guy's amazing. He's not throwing me out of the office. And I'm looking like, so wait a minute, you were admiring me the whole time you were insulting me? And she basically said, yes.
Wow. Huh.
And I didn't notice, but when I started to validate her, that's when she calmed down. They just ignored all this slaughter. And everything was that. Another thing I discovered was a lot of what they said was very ambiguous. It could be interpreted in at least 2 different ways.
Wow.
And if you went with the less common way,
Mm-hmm.
you were probably closer to what was really going on. And if you validated them in that way, they stopped acting so hostile. And nobody believed me at first, but I was able, when I was a residency training director, I was able to teach beginning residents how to do it, and it worked for them too, almost immediately.
Okay.
Validate, 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 validate. And then when another school of thought called dialectical behavior therapy came around, that was one of her theory, a lady named Marcia Linehan, her theory was that they had been invalidated a lot when they were growing up, but she doesn't deal with that. She deals with their reactivity and gets them to calm down, but I didn't think that was enough. It was sort of like if somebody's walking behind you and stabbing you in the shoulder with a penknife, we could give you a opiate and it wouldn't hurt as much, but wouldn't it be better to get to stop the guy who's, I mean, that kind of seemed kind of strange to me. But again, I didn't have any idea what was going on. And later I just had some of the most, I mean, this one that I saw at the beginning had been threatening suicide. And she said, by the time you call security, I'll be gone. There's nothing you can do.
Okay.
So a sense of helplessness. And I realized that she seemed to be going for three different things. She either wanted me to be hostile, helpless, or guilty.
Huh.
And of course, the second two always led to the hostility at the first. And if they weren't succeeding in that, they'd knock it off. Unless they were only coming to stay in character and not really for help, in which case they'd drop out of therapy. You wouldn't see them again. But most of them are actually coming for help. And they calm down. And I was trying to figure out, but later on I had a patient, so after I finished my residency, I started work at a hospital. I got turned off to psychotherapy, actually. Let me kind of back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Because of all the different theories. So the analysts to me were almost cult-like. In fact, they would pressure you to get into therapy. Become an analyst, you had to go into therapy yourself. And to me, I was starting to get sarcastic. Oh, should I? Because there were a bunch of different analytic theorists too. There's Freud, Jung, Adler, but there were several others. And I said, well, should I see a Freudian or a Jungian? They said, it doesn't matter. Oh, but they say completely different. What do you mean it doesn't matter? Then you need to get into therapy to find out why you're resistant to the idea. That's three logical fallacies in one sentence. I was impressed. I mean, it could be because I was resistant to the ideas, but it might have been because I was right to point out that this can't all be correct. And it was ad hominem because it was directed at me personally. And it was a non sequitur. I mean, it just didn't make any sense at all. And I kind of dismissed it like this isn't science. I didn't know that. So later, I read a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which talked about how whenever something's in its infancy, any science, there's always a bunch of different theories. And in psychiatry, it's especially the case because, again, we can't read minds, and our knowledge of the brain is in its infancy.
Yeah.
You're hearing a lot of stuff about this brain thing in a scan is indicative of this disorder. And that's usually not true because there's plenty of people that don't have it that have the disorder, and there's plenty of people that do have it that don't have the disorder. Plus, if you do 2 or 3 in a series, then you get different results. There's a trillion connections between nerve cells in the brain, which are about 40 billion or something like that. And they're constantly changing.
Okay, so you said about 2% of the population has this disorder.
Maybe even more.
Maybe more. How many of those that have these problems are actually analyzed? Or, I mean, do their family members recognize that, oh, this person has a problem? Or are they considered to be bipolar or schizophrenic or things like that, and they're misdiagnosed?
If they come for help, first of all, that's the question, because I'm sure a lot of them don't. But when they do, there's been a trend to diagnosis with something you can treat with pills, basically. So they do get misdiagnosed as bipolar. Now everybody's bipolar. That used to be called manic depressive illness. That's a real major psychiatric disorder, and it's episodic. And it's got to last for a certain amount of time. It's arbitrary where we put the cutoff. But if it doesn't last for a week or two, you're probably dealing with something else. But there was a trend, and I knew the guy that kind of started the trend to have bipolar 2. So anybody who had a rage reaction was automatically diagnosed with bipolar. But a manic episode doesn't last 10 minutes. It lasts at least a week. Plus, they're completely different than they are the rest of the time. It's not like they're the same.
And this you're talking about bipolar 2?
Bipolar 2, yeah. Some of them
would go on for 2 weeks.
Bipolar 1, yeah. Bipolar 2 is supposed to go on for, the manic is also supposed to go on for at least a week. You know?
Okay.
The precedent could be longer, but they just didn't pay attention. In fact, one of the guy, I guess the guy that kind of came up with the bipolar 2 concept was at my school for a while. Ann and I had known him from before.
Mm-hmm.
And in private, he acknowledged that most of his bipolar 2 patients had been sexually or physically abused as children.
Really?
But he never said that in the public.
Okay.
Talk
So it
ever.
was his own research, but he did not bring that out.
Well, and he was working
Or study,
and he
so
was
to
being
say.
funded by drug companies.
Okay.
He didn't have any actual grants. I don't know,
Okay.
maybe later on he did.
Okay.
And he had trained a couple of people in the community, and one of them we used to give what they called mock orals. When you're a psychiatrist, you have to take a written exam, and then they used to have oral exams too,
Mm-hmm.
where you interview a patient and present them in a very short period of time, and
Mm-hmm.
see how organized you were and how you approach things and all that. And he actually told our residents, "Don't ask about how long the episode lasts."
Okay.
Well, I know it's arbitrary that we say 1 week for the manic and 2 weeks for the depression, but we do that because we don't want to get people that are upset about things in their life and diagnose them with a major mental illness
Yeah.
or personality characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Borderline is a disorder of personality. Now, some people want to put those in the same category as brain diseases. Guess what? They're not. Brain diseases don't come and go depending on who you're talking to.
Very
If you're
true.
manic, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Watch the videos of Charlie Sheen when he was talking about, all these wonderful things. He was living with 2 prostitutes, got AIDS, went on. He denies that he's bipolar, so I don't know if he really is or not. But he actually went on tour with an act, but had no act. I mean, that's the kind of thing people do when they're manic. They're delusional. They're grandiose, and they don't need sleep. Ever try staying up 3 straight nights? And are you sharp mentally after you do that? No, you're not. But somebody who's manic, guess what?
Mm.
It's like they don't need sleep anymore. It's a major.
Or could be just little sleep. If there is anywhere from no sleep to little
very
sleep,
little
and they'll
sleep, and
stay.
they're still hyper.
Yeah, still hyper.
Still hyper.
And do you think that they realize, that what I did was wrong, so maybe they can calm down and then they go back again?
It doesn't work that way. A lot of
Not-
times they have no insight into what they're.
I see. Okay.
But sometimes they do. But sometimes they learn. And there's some
Okay.
famous bipolar people that actually were very successful, but they took their medicine.
Okay.
Because it's easy to treat, as it turns out. There's a
Mhm.
drug called lithium. Now they're trying to have all these expensive brand name drugs instead, which have tens more side effects than lithium did. And not everybody responded to lithium, but most of them did. And if you took it, at least it would stop manic episodes. You could still have a depressive episode, but then you could put them on an antidepressant as long as they stayed on the lithium.
Mhm.
If you just gave them an antidepressant alone, that was bad news because that would push them into a manic state, which is worse because they do all kinds of
Right.
dangerous
And
things.
I know that you have some connection also in San Francisco with helping homeless people. Some association with that.
Well, I mean, that was more, I don't have a direct association, but I would
Okay.
go because I knew that a lot of the mentally ill.
Mhm.
This is a whole other area we could spend a lot of time in. I'm getting away from sort of my background, but there's a book called San Francisco,
Okay.
which talks about what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
There used to be a lot of abuses in psychiatric hospitals, and the people would be committed against their will,
Okay.
and they couldn't leave. And sometimes families would keep them dumped in there and have stuff about them and stuff. Have you ever seen the movie Frances? It's about an actress that all happened to. I think she was probably borderline rather than bipolar, but yeah, I can't really tell from a movie or from a biography where as doctors, we're not supposed to diagnose people we haven't seen ourselves.
Correct.
But you can speculate as to what might be the diagnosis.
True. Very true.
These people, the people that actually had schizophrenia, they are out of touch with reality. They're hearing voices that are telling them what to do. They're delusional. They have all these crazy thoughts that nobody else shares. So it's not like a strange religious thought that everybody shares. They're the only ones that believe it. The first person I ever saw as a medical student believed that every person who wore oxblood colored shoes was a descendant of George Washington.
Huh.
Okay.
Okay.
You couldn't talk him out of it, Stuff. And they're that way because we used to be able to sit with them for months. So there were abuses, like I said. So in 1969, I think it was, in California, there was a law that sort of helped get rid of the abuses. So you could commit somebody, but it could only be basically for 17 days. You would be on a 3-day hold, and then 14 days after that. If they were suicidal, you could hold them for another 14, but after that, they were on their own. But that would be enough time to put them on medication, so they would, because they have no insight that there's anything wrong. They think everything they think is normal.
Exactly.
So the police would bring them in. They would running down the freeway naked, thinking the FBI was bombarding them with laser rays. And they were absolutely convinced that that was true. But
wow,
they don't think that anything's wrong. But when you put them on medicine, they get better. And there were 3 criteria for committing them. Of course, they had to be mentally ill, but they had to be either a danger to themselves, danger to others, or something called grave disability, which meant that they couldn't provide for their own.
So now this you're talking about is schizophrenia.
Yeah, schizophrenia.
Okay.
Right, but any major mental illness.
But so when somebody has this problem, and when they do not understand that they themselves have this issue, somebody else might be telling them, hey, you need help, you need help.
It doesn't matter.
So when they come to see a psychiatrist, they're not thinking, they don't know, they don't realize.
They're usually they brought it by their families or by the police.
Right. But then what happens when they say, no, this is the person who is doing this. I am not doing anything like that. I am nice, I'm fine, I'm intelligent, I am superior to this or that person. I do not have a problem, that person has a problem. When a person or a patient comes to a doctor or psychiatrist who doesn't realize and just talks about the atrocities, not about what they have done, but onto them, and they are misguided, they're wrongly, the understanding is wrong. How do you analyze that in that case?
Well, I mean, it's usually pretty obvious. There are certain symptoms they have to have when you evaluate them. Plus, you have to interview their family members, like they're brought in by the police, to find out how they're acting, because they may be smart enough not to tell you about it, because they know some people.
Okay, so then, which means the answer is that you have to find it from others as well,
usually,
not just that patient alone. Okay,
right.
All right.
But they have to have certain symptoms.
Symptoms. Okay.
All right. So you're looking for that, and they have to be a danger to themselves. So others are gravely disabled.
And so they could be hyper.
You can't commit them unless they fall into one of those 3.
They would be very hyper.
Well, a manic person would be hyper. Schizophrenic might be calm, but they're crazy. I mean, they're hearing voices telling them what to do. You know, they think that they're being bombarded by the CIA is after them because they have the secret to the universe. I mean, it gets pretty. It's not strange. It's really bizarre.
Okay, so and it can also be like, oh, I saw this dream, so the universe is telling me something else. Things like that.
You say, well, how is the universe telling you that? And they say, oh, it's easy. They just put these thoughts in my head with electric rays. Okay. You know, again, there's milder cases where you have to do a little more work to find out what's really going on. That's why you interview families. Now, the families can be exaggerating too. That was part of the problem in the old days. But if you committed somebody after a week, and after 3 days, they could go in front of a judge and ask to be released because they didn't think they met those criteria. And it was funny because I used to go to the court because I worked for a psychiatric hospital when I first finished my residency, and I was turned off to psychotherapy. So I would go to court to talk to these people. It was funny because if a new judge came, they would be kind of tending to release a lot of them. But by the time they'd been there for a few months, they hardly released anybody, because they would see the same faces coming back over, and they'd start to like catch on that maybe there really was something wrong. But anyways, getting back to the homeless, okay. The criteria for grave disability meant you couldn't provide for your own food, clothing, and shelter, and having a cardboard box on Skid Row did not qualify as being able to provide for your own food, clothing, and shelter. So there was a group of what we call patients' rights advocates. Later, the ACLU even got involved, that we're trampling on these people's constitutional rights to refuse treatment, even though they were psychotic. I often wondered, well, what about people with Alzheimer's disease? Should we let these people wander the streets? We're infringing on their civil rights.
Right.
Well, they have a brain disease. Well, so does schizophrenia. Well, you can't prove it. Well, because their knowledge of the brain is...
Exactly, yeah.
Again, I tell what I think is a personality issue is that it's specific to situations and people, whereas schizophrenia is not.
So
And they
who
have it
are
all the
these?
time. And I used to sit with them 3 months sometimes, and I see how they slowly came out of it with the medicine.
So who are these people who come up with these kinds of arguments? Oh, you're violating their civil and these rights and some rights.
I don't know. They're similar to what I look at today's politics, but we talk about social justice warriors. They're on the same thing. Everything is a conspiracy. You know, racism is responsible for every problem we have in the entire country. Like, really, and nothing else. Pretty much, that's it. Not everybody who is interested in these things gets involved with that, but this was a real issue. In fact, at the beginning, when the patient first came with the patient rights advocate, the police could sign the initial 5150 for you Van Halen fans. That's the 72-hour commitment, and
Okay.
then the doctor could come in the next morning and countersign it.
Oh, okay.
Well, the patients' rights people were appalled. The doctor has to come in the middle of the night. So the first time I got a call saying you need to come in, I said, "Why are they there now? Because if they're not, I ain't coming."
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have
It doesn't make-
lives.
yeah.
We have lives too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
come in
correct.
the middle of the night to
Correct.
countersign it. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. I can do it in the morning
Right.
if it's no good. And I got most of these people to sign in voluntarily, anyways.
Yeah.
Most of the time, if you approached it right,
Mm-hmm.
you could get them if you were a bit empathic with them
Right,
instead of
right.
arguing with them all the time. You could get them to sign in as a voluntary patient, and then it wouldn't be a big deal. So all these people were coming out from the streets, okay, and it was really there were signs in San Francisco saying it's almost something positive that you were on the streets.
Really?
Yeah, like we can't touch these people. So now we have all these tent cities all over California because these people, about at least a third of homeless are severely mentally ill because we can't hospitalize them. Oh, California just passed a law just now, actually, that's trying to reverse this and trying to force some of these people
Thank God.
into treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you can't do anything with them, but they would get arrested for minor nuisance crimes like peeing on somebody's porch or something like that. And I was at the largest mental hospital in the United States today is Los Angeles County Jail. So do you think that's better for them to be in jail rather than treated? Well, apparently these people really do.
Yeah.
To me, that's crazy. I was about ready to tell my patients to go over and pee on patients' rights people's porch and see if they liked it. I mean, I'm sorry. I obviously have strong feelings about this sort of thing. I never did that, but I was tempted.
And of course, when calling you and another psychiatrist in the middle of the night is one thing. If you are in emergency room doctor, and that's a different.
Then you're there already,
right?
Yeah, there's no problem.
Right. So those are different things. So one doctor against the other, and I also want to talk about. You have written some books.
Yes.
So yeah, please tell us about that.
Okay. Well, as I was saying earlier, I got interested in why that woman was insulting me and admiring me at the same time. I had another patient that I was going to discharge her from the other mental hospital that I work with, and she suddenly tried to kill me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't a small woman. She suddenly broke out, took a lamp on my desk and smashed it, started coming at me with a point, and then phones used to weigh something back then. She reached over and tried to bash me over the head with the phone. Finally, I rolled into the hallway, and the nurses pulled her off of me. Who wants to be in a mental hospital? It was partly my fault, as I found out later, because I wasn't empathic. I should have asked her, "Well, why are you afraid to go home? What's waiting for you there?" But I was never taught to ask those questions by the analysts. In fact, my first analytic supervisor said, "You don't even take a history," and I thought he was nuts. I mean, you don't take a history.
Yeah.
No, you just immediately go into seeing how they relate to you, and that's all you do. And that's why they're quiet all the time for the first 3 years or something like that. To me, it was like, that didn't make a
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, very true. So I mean, because then with a patient you have to develop a relationship, right? And that patient has to find solace in you
and trust you.
Trust
It has to trust you.
So that trust has to be built, and that can be built only by talking about.
Right. And plus, I mean, I got a lot better at getting them to open up about the truth about things. So gradually, I got in touch with the family dynamics, and when I first started role playing with them, I would be them, and they would be their parent, and then they would show me what their parents were acting like. These are adult patients, not kids.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going, oh my God, if that's true, no wonder you act the way you do. Well, when they do tell other doctors, they get accused of distorting everything, because sometimes they do distort things if you don't approach them right initially.
Right.
They don't want you to really know what's going on.
How often do you think that distortion is does it happen?
Well, again, it depends on your relationship with the patient. With most
But see,
people, they're going to continue.
patient,
They're acting. I found out that they were playing a role in their family,
okay,
and they were looking for people to help it because it's a miserable role to play.
okay,
But they sacrificed their own needs to stabilize their parents. Now, this is nobody agrees with me about this, so it's not the conventional wisdom at all.
okay,
But to me, it became so obvious because they got accused of distorting people. Some of them started to bring tapes of telephone conversations they had with their parents when their parents didn't know that they were being recorded. And I go, good grief. Talk about it.
So that was
invalidation. That was
validation and evidence actually.
Yeah,
to prove that what they were saying was actually true.
I'd invite their one parent in at a time, because if there's two against one, it's really hard. So I invite them. Some of them were on their best behavior, but not all of them. I had a guy was a doctor. He came in and he was just lighting into his his daughter. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was about to tell him he's killing his daughter. Like, there was a family systems guy named Nugent would actually have said something like that, but he had a big name, but I wouldn't have been able to get away with it. But I just cut the session short. I was like, but my God. But other people will be on their best behavior. But then I had a setup to find out. I'd ask them, I'd warned the patient that I was going to do this, but I'd ask them, what do you think is wrong with your son or your daughter? And I warned them that doesn't mean I really think that they're the problem.
Right.
I know it's a family problem. You get into the issue of blame too, or you're just blaming the parents. Well, it's got nothing to do with blame. They're all in the same soup.
Yeah, so it's quite possible that the parents, both or one of the parents, also have some issues.
They always do.
Okay.
One of the people that did family systems, which is another major school of psychotherapy, there's a guy named Murray Bowen, and my method is actually based on a criticism of his work, but he would do what he called a genogram, where he would trace the development of these issues over at least 3 generations to find out historically. Because just to say that this person is acting this way because of their parents, that doesn't explain anything, because then you have to ask, well, why are their parents acting that way? You're just kicking the ball down, the tin can down the road. You're not really answering anything. And then I came across some ideas, because I like to read outside of my field. So there's an idea from anthropology called cultural lag, which means that culture changes, but families don't always keep up with the changes. So the rules they're operating under don't work. They don't work anymore, but they haven't been able to change them. But then why? So we'd have to go in the history and find out, why. And you get into trouble again. You're stereotyping ethnic
That
groups.
makes sense. So the cultural lag that you're talking about is making good sense to me, because maybe the parents are lagging and they are in their whatever, 30, 40 years or their young time, whatever things were that time, but they want to apply those same things and not evolve along with what has evolved along with the community.
They don't think of it that way, though.
Correct.
They're just, you can see it in immigrant families best, because if they're coming from a very different culture, their children are often the go-between between them and the U.S. culture. But it's a little bit more complicated, because they're ambivalent about it, because they too can see what other people are doing. They don't, as Bill Maher once said, they don't live in a cave and not get cable.
Right.
They can see what so they're kind of attracted to that, but their families wouldn't approve. So they kind of sacrifice.
Okay. So now, when you're talking about this lag, that lag obviously is between parents and the patient.
Well, it's between the parents and the culture.
Well, okay, right.
And then it goes down to
what I'm trying to use a thing that it might not be between spouses or partners, because that cultural lag might be, it is with parents and not necessarily with the same generation. Would that be true?
Well, it could be, but people who are ambivalent about the rules tend to be attracted to other people who have the same sort of intrapsychic conflicts. Freud, I think, was wrong because he thought it was all in one person's head. I think they were shared by the whole family. So they're attracted to a certain type of person who will enable them to continue to play the role they're playing in order to try to stabilize their parents, who can get really, in cases, in severe cases, if one of my patients would suddenly change, the parent would start threatening suicide. And then relatives would come out of the woodwork yelling at my patient, "How can you treat your mother this way?" Analysts never even asked about that. If they were having marital problems, I'd say, "What does your mother-in-law say about this?" I got all this information I was never taught to even inquire about. Okay, so like a woman that marries one alcoholic after another would be as a common example, but it can be a lot more subtle than that. But you ask her, well, where do you tend to meet your soon-to-be husbands? Where do you think? In bars. Okay, but I met my wife in a bar. I'm not an alcoholic, but if that's the only place you're meeting them, okay, but it's almost like a sixth sense. They can come across a crowded room and find each other. People with borderline personality are often attracted to people who have another personality disorder called narcissistic personality. That's talked about all over the place now, narcissism.
Yeah.
Well, the narcissist comes from a family where they were given a responsibility to fix something, but then their legs were cut out from under them whenever they tried to do that. And the borderline person comes from a family where that's sort of complementary to that. So he's trying to fix her, and she's acting like my patient did, that was insulting me the whole time. And that can get to a really bad situation of violence. That doesn't excuse the guy from hitting her, but sometimes when you hear what went on, you can wonder. I wonder about, like, again, I can't really say, but the little I saw the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard situation, kind of, I thought those films that they were talking about, it looked like they were kind of in the middle of that. Again, I don't know for sure, but it sure sounded like it. And she was accused of doing all these crazy things, like defecating in his bed. You can imagine how that could start to get real. I had one guy that got so upset with his wife, he took all his money out of the bank in cash and torched it, burned the money, so there was no way to replace it. That's how angry he got.
So now, talking about Amber and she defecating on the bed.
If she did, that's true.
How many incidents like that have you come across? Not necessarily to that extent, but somewhere like that, close to somebody doing something like this.
Well, if you find out, usually it's variations on the same theme. The number of variations are large. That's what makes these people so interesting. I'm easily bored. So you look for patterns, but the way it plays out are influenced by there's other people involved, other family members, historical factors that differ. You come from different ethnic backgrounds. Again, you got to watch out. Not stereotypes have some truth to them, okay, but there are a lot of people that don't meet the stereotypes. It's a bell-shaped curve usually, but that doesn't mean that the stereotypes don't have some validity. But you get accused of that. There's a book, in fact, called Ethnicity and Family Therapy, where the authors got different people from different cultures to write about their culture. And she was Irish, and she knew about the sainted mother and the drunk father and all that like that. But she said there was some validity, because of the historical backgrounds of that group. That doesn't mean that any one person is going to fit into that exactly, but there are other patterns that might. So every family is different, yet there are some common patterns. So you're looking for themes rather than specific. So I mean that's a strange illustration of defecating in a bed. She's giving him a raft of what. Exactly. If you want to just think of it that way.
Yeah, true. So let us talk about your books.
Okay, so again, I keep getting diverted a bit. I started to develop a therapy model where I would try to train first I would have to find out what was going on and develop what we call the genogram, and more than Murray Bowen did, because he would just talk about who was kind of enmeshed or stuck together and who was fighting each other, but it was over certain themes. Like you can you get along great when it comes to your work, but be fighting like cats and dogs when it comes to your choice of mates. Content and the process of what goes on both
Okay.
both matter. But of course, if I couldn't get funding to study it because people thought it was too dangerous to send patients back to confront their and people like that. And there was a certain danger, but I knew about it very well. But I had ways to get out so before it got to that point, so they could come back and we could reanalyze it and redo it. So gradually, I developed a bunch of methods for how to confront a family member if you have a personality disorder about the negative messages you're getting.
Oh, wow.
And why it's happening. And you have to be empathic.
No.
Otherwise, you get fight, flight.
Very good. Okay.
Or tuning out. So it's very easy to get into fight, flight, or tuning out of these families because they're not supposed to talk about these issues. It's against the rules in the family to even bring them up. So you got to be real careful about how you go about doing it. And gradually I developed different strategies. I do it through role playing. After I would have them play their parents and I would try out various things. And when we seemed to be on the right track, I would pursue that. And then I'd run into another blockade. And then I found out there was a whole series of blockades. It's not just.
Wow.
One author wrote about denial. There's 4 kinds of denial.
Okay.
And you can go through one, you can get through one and then there'll be another one. You could deny that it ever happened. You could then deny that it really was an important thing anyways. Then you can deny that you shouldn't be held responsible because you were drunk. And it just goes.
Okay.
So how do you bring up with a father that sexually abused you as a kid? How do you bring that up? They're just going to deny it. If you bring it up with their mother, they'll blame her half the time. They say, you were acting seductive when you were 5. I'm not kidding. That's the kind of stuff that they don't tell you about this unless you know how to ask about it. And I've seen it in person because I've seen a couple of these people just by accident.
Okay.
And watching the family. If you don't have a camera on them 24/7, you don't know what's really going on at all.
Yeah. And in any circumstance, because if we are not there, we really do not know what exactly is going on, and they do not necessarily tell 100% truth, and they could be lying 100%.
Or they don't know that something's important. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you don't get the whole. Sometimes they're protected, but the biggest one is they're protecting their parents. One patient was accidentally let it slip that the relative that took her in when she was a foster kid, the husband molested her, and she freaked out, and everybody thought, well, she doesn't want to talk about it because it makes her feel so awful. No, she didn't want to talk about it because she was afraid her aunt would find out about it.
Oh.
Because they took her in and it would hurt her. That's what she was afraid of. Not that she couldn't handle it. I mean, there are similar post-traumatic stress disorder in these families.
Yeah.
Because these things, in really severe cases, it's very, very strong. So how do you be empathic with somebody that molested you when you were 7? Well, I distinguish between empathy and sympathy. Okay. Empathy means I can sort of understand what made you do it, but we both know that was not the way to go. It's awful. And they know it too, even though they're denying it. They know it. Sympathy means, yeah, it was okay. No, it wasn't okay. In fact, if you're sympathetic with a child abuser, they're going to laugh in your face because they're going to know you're full of crap. Because they know what people think of child molesters. It's not rocket science, really.
Yeah. And do some people use their past? Yeah. Many times, I am definitely not a doctor, and we talk about this on the show that I'm not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, and not even a counselor. But what I have read and what we talk about on the show, I found that there are many people who have problems in their past, some sexual abuse, physical abuse, and they behave with their partners and friends and other now new contacts based on their past.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And sometimes, is it possible that many people who have gone through that, because they want to use that as a sympathy to make new friends or new partners, and they say, oh, I was molested and I was raped or this and that. Does that happen?
I don't mean that they make it up, or it really happened.
No, no,
They're
no,
trying
no.
to use it to.
No, no, yeah, they're
You're
using
talking about the parent or the adult child?
the child. The child is using their past to get sympathy from friends they want to, or people they want to make friends or partners or things like that.
Well, again, it's very complicated. We have the false memory thing going on where
Okay.
people were hypnotized by their therapist who told them you have this disorder, therefore you must have been abused, which was nonsense.
Okay.
A lot of the people that have the disorder were, but,
wow.
not all of them.
I see.
And they would take these suggestible people. So then the people that say, oh, this is a minor problem, there's no child abuse, they're all making it up, right?
Huh.
There was a false memory syndrome. There was a scientist named Elizabeth Lofton that was a memory scientist. And she showed a film of a bank robbery or a store robbery, and then a few weeks later, she would have people write down what they saw in the film, and everybody had a completely different thing. So memory is totally unreliable. Well, that leaves out a couple of issues. Number one, that was a one-time thing. When we're talking about child molest, it's usually somebody that's in the house who you know very well. So you may not remember what color shirt he was wearing or what day it was or what you did just before. But the fact that he raped you, you're probably going to remember. In fact, when you're traumatized like that, it's almost impossible to forget.
Very
it's
true.
the other way around. So they were all saying it's false memory. So you have other people that were pushing the idea that child abuse is everywhere. It's like the most common thing in the world. So if a father just hugged his teenage daughter and accidentally rubbed a little bit against her breast with his chest, you are a child molester. Well, that's nonsense too. So you had one group of people insisting that it hardly existed at all, and other people saying it's everywhere. I think they were trying to normalize it so they wouldn't feel so bad about their family. Everybody does. They're bad.
Yeah.
After all.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have everything again from the two extremes, and in between, depending on a bunch of other factors and other relationships.
Very
Sometimes it's a family friend or something that's
correct.
Even something like that can help.
Yeah.
That's why there's different levels of severity. Because there's other experiences you have beside that. But
very true.
But as mammals, we are very tuned in to our parents. There's actually cells in the fight or flight part of the brain that respond only to your parents' faces, nothing else.
Huh. Okay.
And that had survival value a long time. Another topic I came across was something called kin selection from evolutionary biologists, who most evolutionary biologists won't say they believe in it because it's politically incorrect and they worry it'll be used for social Darwinism or something like that. I think it makes sense. If you're, or people are willing to sacrifice under certain circumstances themselves for the sake of the group. Why are people willing to go die in a country in a war?
Yeah.
They're not maximizing their chances for, success in producing themselves. They're going to get killed.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a herd of deer and one of the deer breaks a leg, if they all let you, tend to him, and the deer with the broken leg sticks around, and then they're picked off by predators. So it was selected for genes for them to say, "Oh, nice knowing you," and for the injured one to go, "Yeah, nice seeing you," and go off and die, because it would preserve that in the herd, and that would tend to get selected for. It doesn't mean we can't override that, though. That's another important. We also evolved to be able to use critical thinking, but we often don't in order to fulfill a role function that we're playing inside of our family. So that's another thing that I'm sort of the only one that really talks about, is how these people are actually sacrificing themselves. It looks like they're selfish, and they're anything but selfish. They're miserable. If they were selfish, they would be happy. I mean, you think, because they're getting all the needs, but they're miserable. They don't really want to do this stuff, but they feel that they have to, and they need enablers a lot of times. So they'll find a spouse that will help them play their role. So getting back to the books, I started to develop models. So my first book, I tried to integrate all the different schools of therapy. And it was grandiose. What can I say?
How many books have you written?
I've written 5 books. Two for the public and 3 for therapists.
Okay. So what we want to do, I'm talking to our listeners, that we want to go through so many things, and I would love for us to talk about it multiple times.
Okay.
But as we come to the end of this show, what would you like to end with?
Well, I'm going to plug I have one self-help book about coping with controlling, demanding, and dysfunctional parents. And it's not meant for people with borderline personality disorder, because the editor said those people really need a therapist's help, even though a lot of the strategies are the same. It's people that have parents that are driving them nuts.
Okay.
And they're told they're toxic parents and they should cut them off, but they don't really want to do that. And even when they do, even though they say they're glad they did, they're really not, because they're really ambivalent and they're kind of wishing for it. But there are ways to find ways to be empathic with the behavior. It's like trying to be empathic with somebody that's kicking you in the knee at the same time. Not easy to do, but it can be done. Especially, you have to investigate the family history and find out, why are they acting like that? You know, like if you came from a black family and your great grandfather was lynched, you might be more sensitive to racism than somebody that didn't happen to. You know?
Very true. Yeah.
Am I stereotyping? I don't think so. It just seems logical,
right?
That would.
Very true.
I go into what kind of historical things you could look for to explain certain kind of,
and
you have to identify the core conflictual relationship theme, which is sort of the main internal conflict that you all share. And again, it's a matter of fixing things. It's not a matter of attaching blame, because parents are acting that way because of the way their parents treated them, and they're acting that way because of so I always say, let's blame Adam and Eve and get that out of the way. It doesn't help. If you want to solve the problem, don't get into whose fault it is.
Very nice. Very nice. Very good.
Let me in.
Perfect. That is a very good ending. So, ladies and gentlemen, I find these topics really exciting because they deal with lots of people in our lives. It's, as you said, it might be 2%, but there are multiple variations of problems and issues. It could be bipolar, it could be this, it could be schizophrenia, and things like that. So there are many variables within the behavior of so many people, so many personalities, and so many personality disorders. It is very, very exciting. We have talked about it in the past, and for me, it is a very good subject. So we are going to have you, Dr. Allen, multiple times on our show. But for today, thank you so much for coming into our show.
Again, thanks for inviting me.
And for more information, of course, give us a call at 901-849-DEEP. That's 849-3337. Or you can also write to us at sgp97@hotmail.com. If there are some topics that you think we would like to cover, and you are interested in knowing about that, let us know. Reach out to us again at sgp97@hotmail.com, or you can also text us at 901-849-DEEP. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Dr. Allen. And you all have a wonderful time. Thanks. Bye-bye.